And what I've been asked to do is kind of share with you a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart, having been an entrepreneur 4 times, and found out the very hard way that it is the people part of scaling a business that is the hardest part. Everyone will tell you it's product market fit, it's raising venture capital, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the data, and I'm a very data-driven person, 66% of startups fail due to people problems, 66%. So you can set all that other stuff aside. It's all important, raising money, finding product market fit. Should we be virtual? Should we be remote, et cetera? Great stuff. But I'm here to talk with you for the next hour or so about the people part and specifically how to attract the right people to your venture as you scale. Sharon, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, I can see your slides okay.
Awesome. Very good.
And if anyone can't do, please let us know, but I can see them fine. And
so I'm relatively informal. I'd love to make this an interactive discussion. So raise your hand, type in the chat box. Sharon, if someone has a message that I don't see, feel free to interrupt. You're not going to hurt my feelings. And then I'm happy to stay around for some time at the end as well.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, Sharon, okay, the chat box is up.
Chat box is back on.
Great. Okay, let me, so rather than me monitoring the chat box, maybe Sharon or you or someone on your team.
Yes, so I mentioned yesterday, great. So we will have Noah and Karen monitoring the chat box.
Awesome. So I have a lot of gray hair for this reason. I have hired a lot of bad hires. That's not bad people, that's bad hires. I'm not a big believer that there are bad people, although there are some. But along the way of scaling a business, whether you're one person now or 5 or 10, you're going to get to 100, you're going to get to 1,000, you're going to go public, you're going to take over the world and kick Amazon's butt, you're going to make a lot of hires and you're going to have the opportunity to make a good hire, a great hire, or a bad hire. And over the next hour, I'd like to hopefully help you avoid some of these gray hairs because you guys look great and I don't want you to wind up this way. So I'm not going to go through my background because Sharon was just kind enough to go through it. But what I think is relevant is that I have sat in your shoes. So I'm not just a fancy headhunter. I've started 4 companies, raised 55 million in venture capital. We sold 3 of those companies. I have been CEO, founder, chief bottle washer. I've replaced myself as CEO. I've been fired as CEO. So I have been and done it. And along the way, I've hired about 3,000 people. So what I basically, I'm kind of OCD, anal retentive, and I kind of write down every time I make a bad hire, I try to figure out what did I do wrong. And I started tracking this list many years ago when I started my first company. And what I found over time was there were these consistent patterns, these same things over and over and over, and wound up writing a book about it, which I'd like to give you a free copy of. If you stick around to the end, I'll give you the secret link, the top secret link on how to get the free copy, as long as you don't tell anybody. But in that book, I kind of lay out these 10 things. Now, today, we're not going to have time to cover all 10, but it'll give you a sense of where we're going. But I want to start with some level setting, which is to start with that 1 out of every 2 new hires fails. 1 out of every 2. It's pretty pathetic. Like, what part of your business would you be okay with that kind of hit rate? You could basically skip the whole interview process, the whole recruiting process, the whole reference check process, and wind up with the same batting average as flipping a coin. However, it doesn't have to be that way. That's the way it is. And I've studied it across countries, across sectors, across industries and company sizes, but that's not the way it has to be. It is that way because so many people make so many of the mistakes that I was making. So my goal over the next hour is to show you some very practical strategies to improve that batting average from 50% up to 90%. Now, I wish I could promise 100%, but I will tell you that it's not possible, right? Hiring is part psychology, it's part art, it's part science, it's part selling, it's part negotiating. You're never going to be perfect, but the impact on your startup from improving your batting average from 50% to 90% is enormous. It can mean the difference between succeeding and failing, because every mishire you make slows you down, costs you a ton of money, way more than you could ever imagine, lost momentum, you lose face to your investors, you lose some confidence from them, right? You can lose your job. So it is dramatically important to maximize your accuracy. So quick show of hands or flags or however people want to do it. How many of you expect to hire at least one person over the next 3 months? Okay, almost everybody. Great. So this should be pretty relevant.
Jeff,
Don't believe
before
everything
we
you
move
read.
on- oh,
What's that?
Before we move on, one question is, what does that batting average cost you as an employer? I don't know if you're going to get into that later, but
No, I'll answer it now. So there have been many studies over the cost of a bad hire or a mishire. The lowest I've ever seen is 3 times the person's annual compensation. So let's assume the person is $100,000, that's $300,000. The most I've ever seen is 12 times the person's annual compensation. So 1.2 million. So regardless of the number, it is way more than you think. You lose momentum, you lose opportunities with customers, you lose credibility with your board and your venture capital investors or your angels, you lose sleep. The cost is insurmountable.
Jeff, thank you for asking that question. This is Donna Leckie, founder of Health Venture, and I appreciate you sharing this with our team today and our founders today. One of the things that I wanted to pull that out of you, because a lot of people don't understand that number is a huge number, and not to mention the fact that now you've got to go out and hire someone else, and you have to then also uptrain that person as well. So all the investment that you put into the individual has just gone out the door.
Yeah, it's often underestimated. The best example I'll give is you hire a junior sales rep, right? Your first phone-based telesales, make 100 calls a day, churn them and burn in person, and you hire the wrong person. You could conceivably lose all those opportunities because they really shit the bed, pardon the expression. I'm from New York, sorry. With all those prospective customers. Right? And so you never have a second chance just because that one bad hire, or not just a bad hire or mishire, but maybe you didn't train them, onboard them properly, et cetera. We're going to talk about that too. So I couldn't state that with enough emphasis. I have left seats open in my companies for 3 months, for 6 months, for almost a year until I found the right person. Now it sucks, but it sucks a lot less than a mishire or a bad hire. So resist the temptation to settle, resist the temptation to put a warm body in the seat just because you have too much to do. You will never get over it. You will regret it forever. Don't believe everything you read about the numbers. Certainly we're faced with a most unusual unemployment situation. But if you drill into the numbers, at least here in the US, and obviously because I'm based in the US, I'm more up to speed on the numbers here. It's much more of a dislocation than it is a mass layoff, right? We're at 15% unemployment in the US. That's starting to come down. Hopefully it's peaked. However, if you drill into the numbers for white collar knowledge workers, perhaps college educated, you still find it's around 3, 4, 5%. It hasn't changed all that much. Most of the layoffs, millions, unfortunately, and very sadly, are in hospitality, bars, low-end workers, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully that will change. The market will reabsorb that somehow. But it's still hard to hire great people, right? You can hire people, no problem there. It hasn't been this hard. It hasn't been this easy in years to hire people. But if our standard is to only hire the best people, it's still pretty hard. In fact, in the US, it hasn't been this hard in about 50 years since I was born. The last thing I'll tell you is that to become a startup rock star, now I'm speaking as a 25-year headhunter who started and built and sold businesses, I can tell you that very few people become great at this. If you can become great at this, and by this I mean recruiting and retaining, both are equally important, your future is set. Because even if this startup bombs, I can place you. You will be hired as another CEO. You'll find another co-founder. You'll live to fight another day and have another opportunity because you've proven that you can recruit and retain a top quality team. I would say maybe, 1 in 10 people that I interview can do it. Most people they don't even talk about it in the interview. And that tells me that building a team and scaling a team is not a top priority. They just don't get it. So I don't like to be soft and squishy. Let's be very specific about the terminology. Now I use the word rock star. You could say top performer, superstar, A player, whatever you want to use. I don't care. My definition is three things. I'm looking for someone in the top 5% of the talent available at the price point I can afford. Top 5% available at the price I can afford. Let's touch on those. Top 5%. Steve Jobs used to say that people in the top 5% were 50 to 100 times better than your average employee. They are game changers. They're not the top 25%. They're not above average. These are the top 5%, which means by definition, I got to kiss 20 frogs to find that one potentially who is the top performer for the role. Number two, they got to be available. If they have a non-compete, if I need someone in New York and they live in LA, they're not available. So they have to be available in the pool, right? At a price point I can afford. So it doesn't make sense if I can only afford 50K and she's at 150K, it doesn't matter, right? So I always start by knowing what my budget is. I don't go out and start spending time recruiting only to find out that I can't afford her. That's just a waste of time. So it's important to know what your budget is up front. And if you do that, and if you never settle until you find that person, you set the bar super high, top 5%, and you never settle, your odds of success as a startup go way up. Read The Entrepreneur's Dilemma, one of the best books you'll ever read on this topic. 66% of startups fail due to people problems. So I mentioned earlier that I tracked all these issues, all these mistakes that I made. I'm not going to go through all 10 now. If you want the book, I'll give you a free copy when we're done. I'd like to focus on the first 6 just because they're kind of the first 6 in the process. Does that make sense? And again, please ask questions as we go. The first step is to develop a scorecard. This sounds so simple, yet almost nobody does it, including my clients. And I will not start a search until we have developed a scorecard. What is a scorecard? It's figuring out what you need. So most people know it when they see it. Right? They're so desperate to hire someone. They're so late because they haven't started earlier that they're just, give me resumes, get me candidates. And then they pick the best one. I'll figure it out what I need when I see it, right? The problem is a sales rep is not a sales rep is not a sales rep. A CFO is not a CFO is not a CFO. There are so many different flavors and so many different subtleties, not just in terms of industry, but in terms of scale and size and stage and inbound, outbound, what country you're in. What you must do is agree up front on what it is we're looking for. And don't spend any time looking for it until you've got that scorecard. Now, in a minute, I'll show you how to develop a scorecard. A couple key things here. Agreeing up front at the beginning of the process. That's the time to figure this out, not when you're about to make an offer to a candidate or when you're interviewing a candidate. You will waste a lot of time and you will lose a lot of great candidates because time is not on your side. Great candidates, even in a recession, have choices. I still talk to candidates today who have 3 offers in a week, right? And if you hesitate, if you're not sure what you're looking for, you're going to lose your first choice candidate. You'll also notice here on the screen, I say 4 interviewers. Why do I say 4 interviewers? I have looked for this number for 25 years. Is it 2 interviewers? Is it 20 interviewers? Is it just 1? Should I trust my gut? I trust Google. Google did a long-term retrospective study. They found that 4 is the optimal number of interviewers. Now, you may say, I don't have 4 people in a company. And the answer is, I don't care. You need to find 4 people who you trust and who are capable of assessing talent to help keep you from making that mistake. Under 4, your odds of making a hiring mistake go up dramatically. Over 4, you're wasting your time. You only get 1% more accurate with each additional each additional interviewer. So don't waste your time with 6 interviewers, 10. And I know you're saying, well, I don't have 10 people in my company. One day you're going to have 100 people in your company and everyone's going to want to interview everyone. And the answer is no, 4 people. I think there was a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. Do those 4 people have to be involved in creating the scorecard?
Yes, because we need to get them to agree up front. Now,
right, but you couldn't give a 4th one the scorecard because they're not working.
No, they're not going to have buy-in.
Okay, buy-in. Got it. It's a buy-in.
I need buy-in. This is a negotiation, right? So, Alex thinks I need an inbound sales rep. Sharon thinks I need an outbound sales rep. I think we need a hybrid inbound, outbound. If we don't figure that out at the beginning and nail a scorecard, we're going to spin our wheels. So figure it out up front. Okay. If you don't have 4 people in your company, it could be an investor, a board member, pay a consultant $100 who's an expert. Do something, but get 4 interviewers, okay? So how do we develop a scorecard? Super simple. The book goes through a whole exercise, but I'm going to give you the cheat sheet right now, okay? This takes 20 minutes. This is not a long exercise. We start by defining success in the role. What does it look like when I hire the right person and they absolutely crush the role? Did they ship a new product in time? Did they catch QA issues? You know, did they make 100 calls a day? Whatever it is, we define success. Now we need to figure out, okay, what are the day-to-day accountabilities in order to achieve that level of success, right? If I need a sales rep who builds a pipeline, well, there's a bunch of accountabilities. They got to, you know the market. They got to make 100 calls a day. They got to smile when people hang up on them. They need to log it in CRM, et cetera, et cetera. There's it might be 10, 20 accountabilities. Every job, I don't care if it's a CEO or an administrative assistant, has a list of accountabilities. The next step is to figure out what are the competencies that someone would need to have to successfully do those accountabilities. So if one of the accountabilities is, I need to track everything in my CRM system so I don't lose track of my pipeline, then a competency would be attention to detail, the ability to learn a new CRM system, the ability to enter data, right? Not rocket science. Here's where people go wrong. They go from there to, well, I need 5 to 10 years of industry experience. The problem with that is industry experience has been proven to have nothing to do with how a candidate is going to perform. Of course, it's a nice to have, right? It'd be nice if Sharon hires someone from her industry. Yeah, they might ramp up a little faster because they know the jargon. The problem is that is not in and of itself predictive. It's a shortcut. It's being lazy. It's saying 5 to 10 years in the industry, they must know their stuff. Well, how do you know that their previous employer knew what they were doing when they were hiring? How do you know that that company knew what they were doing? And P.S., your company is a startup. This was a successful company. No one's ever heard of your company. Totally different situation. Not to mention, they might have a non-compete. So don't fall into the trap of 5 to 10 years of industry experience. It is predictive of nothing. In a minute, I'll tell you what is predictive. Okay, let's keep going. So now I have the competencies and now the DNA of the person, which I'm going to put on the back burner just for a minute. That's step 2. We're going to get to that. And I developed this scorecard. Never again am I going to settle. I'm going to interview a candidate. I'm going to assess a candidate. I'm going to score them 1 to 10. I don't care if you use 1 to 100, A through F, choose whatever you like. Here's the problem. Everyone interviews and our highest score is a 6. She gets the job. That's not what we're doing. If they are below an 8, we don't hire them, right? You almost never meet 10s. It almost doesn't happen. So we're really talking about 8s and 9s, right? Mm-hmm. People that we believe after our assessment are highly likely to be successful in this job, okay? It's easy to find the 1s, 2s, and 3s. Any bozo can weed them out. The problem is when you settle for 4s, 5s, 6s, and 7s, when you let that mediocrity in your startup, it is the beginning of the end. You can count the days until you're done. And the reason is, and you've heard this, and it's true, A's hire A's and B's hire C's. So even if your standard is high, as soon as you hire B players, they don't know what an A player looks like. They don't care. They're looking to leave at 5 o'clock. Make sense? Okay.
Jeff, before you move on, a question from the audience is, with the concept of gigification and taking up of contractual workers or freelancers, how important is loyalty in the employee considered nowadays? There's a follow-up to that. I don't know if you want to answer that part first or if you'll answer it.
Let me answer that first.
Okay.
So gigification, never thought I'd hear that word, but I never thought I'd hear the word pandemic in my lifetime either. So yes, there's no question. There's no question that the nature of work is changing. The average tenure is getting shorter in almost every role, almost every country. There are some roles in a company where you need commitment, loyalty, perseverance. You need a long-term player. Long-term could be 2 years, by the way. When I was a kid, it was 20 years. There are some roles in a company where if you get a month out of someone of really good performance, that would be fine. So you need to think about the role, the dynamics. If I'm looking for an architect to design my software, and I get a gig worker who's a part-time Uber driver and 3 weeks they're gone, I got to scrap all that code and start all over again. I can't afford to gigify that role, but there are plenty of other roles that I can. So think about it up front. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. And then the second question is, what's a good approach as well to recruit prospective employees? For example, bring them in as a contractor consultant for project-based performance and then moving on to employment full-time.
We're going to spend some time on that in a bit, so I'm going to put that on the back burner.
Okay, all right.
It's a great question.
Jeff, I have a question. Could you address when you're talking about developing this scorecard, and presumably you would develop this scorecard despite whether or not the person's a contractor or a consultant or a full-time person. Can you address the hiring, particularly when you're dealing with startups? Can you address the hiring of family and friends and how that impacts the business and how that impacts the scorecard?
Sure. So let me divide that into two questions. The first is, yes, you should create a scorecard for any human being that you're hiring. It's that important. And I don't care if they're $15 an hour. The cost of a bad hire or a mishire is enormous. So you do this for contractors, for agencies, for full-time employees. Family and friends. I'm going to be a bit of a pain on this question. I don't hire families and friends. The reason I don't hire family and friends is as follows. I've tried it. I've done it. Been there, done that. There comes a day in the life of almost any employee, full-time, gig, contractor, whatever, when they got to go. It may be a month, it may be a year, it may be 10 years. It almost never goes forever. Nothing in life is forever. And you'll need to be prepared to lose that family member or lose that friend forever when you have to make that difficult decision. And if you're not able to make the difficult decision, you're going to be the one who's out because your board is going to remove you. And I've seen that movie many, many times. So I don't like to play games that I can't win. And you almost can't win that game because the day is going to come when you got to give tough love to your sister, your brother-in-law, or your best friend. Now, a lot of people say I start companies with my best friends because we know each other, we trust each other. That's great. But I can tell you when the shit hits the fan, and I lived in Silicon Valley for 15 years, they are not friends. At the end of the day, someone goes away with hurt feelings or a lawsuit or they got screwed. It's just really hard. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible because there are examples of cases it's worked. I'm giving you my personal opinion. This is subjective. I don't have data on this, other than I've seen it not work out so many times. And if your goal is to scale a business, why would you knowingly put anything in the way that could screw that up? And I just have seen it screwed up too many times, so I don't hire family and friends. God bless you if you want to try it, and if it goes well, you're the case that worked. But I never want to be in a position where I can't remove someone because it happens often. Should we keep going? Yeah, everyone with me? You awake?
Yep.
Yep, good. Bueller? Okay, number one. We've developed a scorecard. I mentioned DNA. Let's talk about DNA. Who wants to take a stab at what I mean by DNA? What is DNA? And I'm not talking about solving the pandemic. It's in the hiring process.
Skills that can't be taught.
Skills that can't be taught. Thank you, Adrian. So, psychologists will tell you that by age 8, we are fully baked. We are the person we are going to become. Now, life-changing trauma can change that, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, my 11-year-old and 13-year-old, I can tell you exactly what they're going to be like when they grow up. And if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. We all have different DNA. It's not good or bad. It's just different wiring. If you're going to be funny, if you're going to be musical, if you're going to have great attention to detail, if you're going to be creative, if you're going to be a singer, whatever it is, by age 8, it's kind of fully baked. Just like I knew I was going to be short and receding hairline and hazel eyes, right? By age 8. So when hiring, why would you hire someone who doesn't have the DNA you need? Because what you're going to have to do is micromanage them and babysit them and be all over them every day, day after day, to try to get them to do what you need them to do in the way you need it done, because it's not innate to their DNA. It's not in their soul. Yes, they can fake it. They can certainly fake it during an interview. They can even fake it for the first weeks or months, maybe for a year. But the day will come where you say, shit, this is a mishire, not a bad hire. It's not a bad person, but I am starting a biotech startup. I need attention to detail. And this person has 8 typos in every email. That's not attention to detail. It is not in their DNA. So I start babysitting them and micromanaging them. And you're spending your time on all your B and C players when you should be spending it on your A players. So Why don't people do this? It's a little hard to assess, but it's not impossible. You just got to know to look for it. The problem is most people don't look for it. They look for what companies they worked for. They worked at Google, they worked at McKinsey, they worked at Apple. Oh my God, they must be amazing. They have the same title that I'm looking for. Oh my God, they must be qualified. They went to Stanford, Berkeley. Oh my God, they must be smart. Yes, those are potentially indicators, but they are shortcuts that are very, very dangerous. What is highly predictive is someone's DNA. It tells you how they're going to behave every single day when they join your team. Again, contractor, gig worker, or full-time person. I used to weight competencies, let's call that fit with the job, 80%. And I used to weight DNA 20%. I have completely changed that now. 25 years later, I do 50-50. It is that important. I don't care if it is the perfect person for the job in terms of competencies. If they don't match on DNA, which is fit with the company, and I don't care if your company is 3 people, because what good is it? How will they be successful in our company just because they have the competencies? They won't. Just a matter of time till they flame out, or I have to remove them, or they piss off everyone else and those people leave and I'm left with just that one person. Okay, so I weight them 50-50. Another reason for that is from the time you interview them and give them the offer to the time they show up for day one, the job has changed. And you can laugh, but it's kind of true these days, right? So if you haven't hired the right DNA to begin with, I can teach them skills, right? I can teach them competencies. Just like, was it Adrian said a minute ago? Yeah, I can teach them anything. I can get them an online course. I can send them to Stanford Business School for a course. I can put them online. I can't teach them how to be detail-oriented or funny or quirky or whatever it is. So DNA is hugely important, and it's on the scorecard. And once you figure it out for your company, and the book goes through a whole exercise of how to do the soul searching to figure out what your DNA is or should be. And by the way, it's very related to your DNA, obviously, as the founder or co-founders. You must over communicate it and talk about it until you're blue in the face. You should taste the vomit in the back of your throat the 50th time you talk about it, because your employees don't just know what it is. You have to talk about it all the time and not just hire someone because they have competencies. You never again settle if they're not a DNA match. Now, don't mistake this for lack of diversity, okay? Last company I led was a huge minority, huge women executive team, et cetera, but we all share the same DNA. So don't mistake that. I'm not saying hire a bunch of clones, but they should be wired in the same way. And then of course, here's the hard part. You need to exit people who don't share that DNA. Maybe you have one now, and you know you do. Or maybe you hire someone and in 3 weeks, you're like, yeah, I made a mistake. What most entrepreneurs do is they look the other way because we hate parting ways with people. As soon as you do that, you're telling your team, I am full of it on DNA. It's just words coming out of my mouth. So if you're not prepared to exit mismatches, don't even go down this path. Don't even talk about it because your team will know that you're not serious. Okay. So we have our scorecard, have competencies, have DNA, don't overcomplicate it, score someone. I score them on competencies, I score them on DNA. I take the average 50-50, even I can do that math. And if it's not at least 8, I move on. I'll keep the position open for 3 months if I have to. Let's move to the job invitation. So now that I know what I'm looking for, now I got to start to find people, which is not a recruiting activity. It is a sales and marketing activity. And if you stink at sales and marketing, perhaps you're the technical co-founder, you got to partner with someone on this part because really this is sales and marketing. Okay.
Jeff, before that, are we going to go over what to put in the scorecard and who should be the 4 interviewers?
We're not going to have the time to do that now, but during the Q&A section, I'm happy to address it more if you'd like. I just want to make sure we cover the high levels. The book goes through in painstaking detail. I mean, it will put you to sleep exactly how to do that.
Sounds good.
Another quick question, Jeff, about over communicating. Is it also like the practice what you preach, and then on that angle, if so, like working in a virtual like landscape now, how can we sort of help hedge those kinds of risks? Because over communicating is great, but you'd rather probably see me in action.
Well, that's a good point. And I think we all need to get used to virtual, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that topic, but I think the genie's not going back in the bottle. But I don't need to be in front of Adrian to know that he's living the DNA of the company, because he did something and I said, oh my God, one of our DNA is quirky. And I literally have a client where they look for quirky people. I won't bore you with why. And Adrian does something that's so quirky, and I wouldn't have thought of it. And I'm like, that's friggin' genius. I need to make an example out of him and talk about it publicly and say, here's an example of living our DNA. I don't need to see him if I read it or he told me about it or whatever it was, or I just saw the work product, right? You don't need to be in front of someone to know that they're living the DNA if you have a sense of their work. And if you don't, then you're probably not close enough to their work. Yeah, there was another question.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on that. I love the fact that you're talking about aligning vision and mission and DNA probably, but as maybe a startup founder, you are yourself figuring it out, and maybe you yourself don't know what that DNA really is and what's that, say a magic recipe, which is going to make your startup a success, So are there any key tips on,
Yes.
How do you identify DNA probably?
Sure. I will venture to say that if you're the founder or co-founder, the DNA of the company is very close to the DNA of you. So if you have self-awareness, which I can tell this from talking to you, and you sit down one night, good bottle of wine, you will understand and crank out what my DNA, and this is not a laundry list, and this is not aspirations, what I want to be when I grow up. These are the 3 or 4 things that people since I was 15 years old told me I am. I'm attention to detail. I'm anal retentive, right? That's the kind of fabric of the company. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, once you design your business strategy, if you don't have a business strategy, you really should not be hiring people unless they're people to help you figure out the market. Okay? Once you have your business strategy, and I teach this at Kellogg, everyone has a marketing strategy, they got a sales strategy, they got a fundraising, and I'm like, where's your talent strategy? And no one can show me a talent strategy. So your talent strategy follows your business strategy. If my business strategy is X, I may need to hire this kind of person. Take Uber. Uber's business strategy is this. So they know their talent strategy is not to hire full-time drivers, but to hire part-time workers who are looking to make an extra $300 on the side and blah, 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 right? They're good with people, good attention to detail, and there's a talent strategy. If I'm Google and I have my business strategy when I started Google, and I met the co-founders when they were about 20 people, and they were going to develop the most complex search engine ever of all time, then the talent strategy was hire the smartest engineers of all time and raise a shitload of money so we can pay them out the ass so we can hire them, right? Your talent strategy has to follow your business strategy. So those are the 2 things I would say for now. But again, the book talks a bit more about it. I want to move to sales. Yep, thank you. I want to move to sales and marketing. What most people do is they write these boring and restrictive job descriptions. How many of you have seen these? I mean, they're ridiculous, right? And then they think they're going to attract top performers. We've already agreed we only want to attract top performers, top 5% people. So what we need to do is develop a job invitation that's an invitation to have a discussion that is so compelling and engaging that someone reads it and says, I really want to talk to them about this. That sounds really cool. Okay, and I'll tell you what that needs to include in a minute. Now, if you're a bad writer, you should not be writing this. Hire a copywriter. I pay a copywriter $50 an hour, and they write a job description that will make you weep. It's funny and it's engaging, right? I'm not a professional copywriter. If you are, that's great. I mean, most job descriptions are so pathetic. They're a laundry list of bullet points, right? It looks like a hostage negotiation letter. You must have this, you must do this, you must have this, you must have this. It's not engaging at all. I mean, they're terrible. These are real job descriptions, right? Answering the phones. You must have phone etiquette. I mean, what A player is going to sign up? You'll get plenty of B and C players, but we've already agreed we're not hiring them. So we're changing the mindset, which is a very arrogant mindset if you think about it, from apply now. I'm the employer. Here's the job posting. Apply now. Guess what? The A players are not going to apply. They're already working, even in the recession. They don't need your crappy job. They're happy. They're kicking butt. And P.S., they're probably not going to see your job description because they don't spend their days on job boards. So you're changing the mindset to much more of a, hey, let's talk. Now, by the way, as a founder, you're going to tell your story 10,000 times. You're going to be sick of hearing yourself talk about it. And every time you talk about it, you got to have the same energy and passion and coffee if it requires that. Okay. But most job descriptions have a bunch of problems. Number one, they have too many must-have requirements. This is science. Harvard Business Review did a study in 2014, and they found something fascinating. 98% of women and 80% of men will not apply for a position if they don't meet every one of the must-have bullet points. Why is that? It's not because they lack competence. It's because they assume you're serious. They're like, why am I going to waste my time applying this job posting that Adrian put up there if I don't have an MBA and it says must have MBA from top 10 school? And then I say, Adrian, why must they have a top 10 MBA? It's not predictive of anything, by the way. And Adrian says, well, they don't really need to have an MBA. Gone, scratch it, right? So one by one, scratch those must-haves. If you're serious about it, have it, right? If you say must live within 60 minutes of Toledo, great. If you're serious about that, right? Or must have worked from home for 3 years before, great, leave it. But when in doubt, it goes, because you will narrow your funnel at a time where we're trying to increase the funnel. Don't forget, you're a pipsqueak startup no one's ever heard of. The last thing you want to do is reducing your funnel, okay? Second, they are written for the employer. So most people take the job invitation and they basically copy the scorecard, and that's the job. These are two completely separate documents. One is for you to assess candidates and one is for you to attract candidates, completely different. Third issue, they're completely boring. They will put you to sleep. That's a big issue, right? Who wants to work for a company that's boring? And I'll add a fourth one, which is especially relevant to startups. And this is that no one has ever heard of you before. And you would say, duh, of course, that's why I'm starting it. And I will tell you that you want to get some borrowed credibility. I don't care if it's an award that you won from a university, you raised $5 from someone famous, you've got 3 customers that I've heard of. Any kind of pixie dust of borrowed credibility is hugely important. Even if you went to Stanford, list that. I mean, just anything that says this isn't some crappy startup, okay? Because there's a lot of crappy startups up there and you guys are not one of them, but you don't want to smell like one, okay? So there's bad news and good news. The bad news, which we talked about earlier, is that most top performers are currently working. Yes, even in the pandemic, most of them, college educated knowledge workers, still have a job. The good news is we are at a record high level of employee disengagement. What I mean by that is most people hate their job, okay? So most people have a job, most people hate their job. Why do they hate their job? Number one reason is they hate their manager, who's a micromanaging tyrant, who's racist and sexist, blah, 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 blah. They don't see them, they're invisible, they're due for a raise for the past 2 years. There's all kinds of reasons, everyone has a complaint. But the good news is they will talk to you if they hear about the opportunity, okay? What they want to know when they talk to you or when they read this job invitation is what it's really like to work there. They want to have a personal connection to the brand, especially millennials, hugely important. So a job invitation should talk about the key outcomes and challenges of the role. I make it sound super hard. You weed out all the B and C players who don't want a hard job, and you attract, by definition, it self-selects, and you attract A players who want something hard. We are going to invent this. We are in the process of inventing this thing that completely is going to put pencils out of business. And it's going to be super hard. And we have no idea if we're going to make it. But when we do, we're going to change the way kids learn in school because we're going to replace the number 2 pencil, whatever it is, right? That's going to appeal to someone, especially someone with kids who is familiar with the number 2 pencil. This is a sales pitch. It is not about you or the company. It is about the reader, just like any advertisement. It's not about your company. No one cares about your company. They care about their problems. So just like consumer marketing, this job invitation is a sales pitch. There are 4 key components that must be in the job invitation. The first is to talk about the industry. Most of the candidates that you're actually talking to don't work in your industry. So you got to educate them on why should I even invest 3 years in this industry? Number 2 is the company. Never heard of your company. So you have any funding? You have any products? You have any revenue? You have anything I might have heard of? Any reason to believe there's something here? Then there's the manager, which in many cases may be you. But the number one reason people leave their job is their manager. So they want to know, who am I going to be working for? Oh my God, I'm working for an award-winning woman. She won, 30 under 30 and she went to Stanford. Oh my God, right? Mover and shaker. And then 4th is the role. What I'm actually going to be doing every day. What most people do is they go right to the 4th part and they forget kind of the industry, the company, the manager, and then you talk about the job, which by the way is going to change in the next 4 weeks anyway. So that's the job invitation. I mentioned if you have non-negotiables, include them. And video is non-optional. must be part of any job invitation these days, especially with millennials. Nothing fancy. Don't spend money. Don't buy a suit and talk me to death for 10 minutes. This is a 60-second video from your iPhone. Throw it on YouTube. It's you talking about why this is the coolest opportunity, why you want to talk to people, why you're inventing this neat new product. Give them some reason to believe. And if you have any employees already, have them create them too. Okay. So include those links in your job invitation. Okay. So we're halfway home. I told you we're going to cover 6. We're going to go to 4 now. How are you going to find these people? So how do we get the job invitation in front of people? I know you hate networking as much as I do, but guess what? The answer is networking. What most founders do and fail is they post and pray. They throw it on a job board. They throw it on LinkedIn or Indeed or a gazillion other job boards. And the problem with that is your person is not looking at the job board. They hate their job, but not so much that they're spending their days looking online on job listings. So you're missing the vast majority of the audience. You're hitting about 10% of the population. You're missing 90% when you just throw it online. Not to mention you get 300 applications, 99% of them are junk, like so far off the mark. That's because it's so easy to apply online. What you're gonna do is tap into your network, your employees' network, and master LinkedIn Advanced Search. Now the book kind of takes you through all of those, but I do want to focus on one aspect, which is employees and your employee referral network. And I know you're saying, I don't have any employees yet. When I say that, I'm talking broadly defined. Your investors, your vendors, your customers, your sister, anyone that's involved with your company is an employee in my definition. Here are the numbers. I've tracked them over the years. When you post a job online, you get 300 applications. 2 of them might be worth talking to, and you almost never make a hire, right? It's cheap. You spend $500, but you get absolutely nothing. Proactive search, which means you reach out to people, right? You spend your days and nights and weekends on LinkedIn. You proactively reach out to people. And you know what? You'll find people that will engage with you, right? Because they all hate their job, and you'll hire some people. So proactive search is way better than job postings. And LinkedIn is only one of, dozens and dozens of places to look. But employee referrals is by far and away the best use of your time. For every 10 referrals you get from your employees, you will want to talk and make finalists out of half of them, and you'll hire at least a few. Big survey. What's the source of most of your candidates? Job boards. What's the source of your best candidates? Employee referrals. This is the holy grail of recruiting. Now, I know you're thinking, Jeff, I only have 2 people. And I'm hoping you'll remember this next year when you have 10 or 15, and 5 years from now when you have hundreds. You almost can't spend too much time on your employee referral program. It is your single best source. It is the holy grail. Fastest, cheapest, and best. It's the best deal in business. You almost never find this. Usually you hear the joke, I got to pick 2 out of 3. No, this is the cheapest. It's the fastest, and they stay the longest and work out the best. Every piece of data shows it. The problem is most people screw it up. Now, I'm not going to go through in detail now how to do it, but I will give you a quick preview. It doesn't matter how much you pay. Every single person that is referred to you gets an interview. No ifs, ands, or buts. They go right to the top of the stack. You don't look at the paper and say, nah, I don't want to waste my time. No, because you will never get another referral from that person. They get an automatic top of the stack, right? Because someone in your company is telling you, we got to talk to her. She's amazing. She has our DNA, right? And you got to talk about this to your blue in the face twice a month with all your employees, your board members, your vendors, your extended network, and shake the trees. It doesn't just happen by itself. You don't just write a policy, stick it in a drawer, and it happens. It doesn't work like that. Let me give you some data. 50% of your hires should come from your employer program. 50%. Best companies I see are 70 or 80%. So it is the best use of time. Let's move to your favorite part, which is the interview. You love interviewing candidates as much as I do, I'm sure. I spend my days and nights interviewing candidates and weekends too. And even after 25 years, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I enjoy it. Until AI solves this problem, and I will invest in any of your companies if they solve this problem, figuring out how to narrow the funnel from, 100. So I usually like to start with about 100 or 200 names. I'll interview about 20, and I want to get it down to, 2 to 5 finalists. But until AI solves it, we're going to be interviewing. The problem is most people have no idea what they're doing. And it is not that hard. And it is something in business that you get better at the more you do it. So there is some pattern recognition, much like venture capital. The problem that most people make, and you've made this yourself, or you've been a candidate and you've been interviewed and you've seen it done, is they completely waste their time with unstructured interviews. What I mean by unstructured interviews is they make it up as they go. They haven't looked at the resume before they sat down. They pick questions out of their butt, and they use it as a source of entertainment to try to have fun with themselves. And I will tell you that use Netflix for entertainment. Don't use your interviews for entertainment. Your goal in an interview is to de-risk the hire, to get the information out of the person. And the way to do that is with a structured interview process. I know it sounds pretty simple. Now, interviews are still not that predictive. In a minute, we're going to get to the single best predictor, number 6. But in the meantime, structured interviews can help you avoid mistakes. Here's why you make mistakes, right? We're looking for our first VP of sales. We developed our scorecard. We know exactly what we're looking for. And then this guy walks in the room. He's straight out of Central Casting, right? He's 6 foot, he's gorgeous. He's got this shave and this smile and everything. We forget everything that we were looking for, and we're salivating and ready to hire this guy before he opens his mouth. Would you agree? Okay. Then we wonder why we make hiring mistakes. Yes. And why we have a 50% batting average. Unfortunately, those first impressions can get you in a lot of trouble. And I don't mean bias in terms of the type of bias that we think of, which is equally bad, but I'm talking about cognitive bias. And I'll tell you about that in a second. Because there's all this research, right? Good looking are perceived to be more competent and more intelligent. Taller candidates are perceived to be better leaders. Why do you think all US presidents are tall? They have a deeper voice. They're perceived to have higher integrity. I didn't get any of these things. I got screwed. Introverts. How could a VP of sales possibly be an introvert? Some of the best heads of sales I've ever hired are introverts. So the brain makes all these assumptions and projects it onto the candidate, and we make bad decisions. A structured interview will at least try to keep you out of trouble by giving you some discipline. I don't even care what questions you ask. The book includes the questions I ask. You can ask those, you can ask whatever you want, but at least ask the same questions. How could I possibly hire someone if I'm asking different questions to all the different candidates? And then how do I compare, right? So ask the same questions. I don't even care what the questions are. But here's the big problem. Confirmation bias. Can anyone share with the team what confirmation bias is?
Yeah. If I say yes, you feel inclined to say yes.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Suhaila.
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 Yeah.
That's
Suhaila,
exactly right. In the first 60 seconds, our brain already decides. 60 seconds. When I got on this webinar, in 60 seconds, you already decided this guy's a clown, he's going to be boring, whatever. That's all it takes. Now, there's good reason for this, right? In caveman days, and we're basically still caveman DNA, we haven't evolved that long, right? We had to decide in 60 seconds, is this dinner or am I about to be dinner? And what am I going to do, right? So that's why we do this. It's a natural inclination. So don't try to get rid of it, but pay attention to it and do something about it. What I do about it is after the first 60 seconds, I ask myself, what do I think? Is she the one or is she not the one? And then I spend the next 59 minutes looking for data to prove that I was wrong. I treat it like a game because otherwise, like Suhaila said, the brain is looking for data to confirm that your original hypothesis was right. Because as humans, we can't stand being wrong. It screws with our head, right? Ask my wife, we hate being wrong. So if my initial inclination is, he's the guy, then I'm going to say, I'm going to spend the next 59 reasons looking for reasons he's not the guy. Or if she walks in and she's kind of, wet handshake and she's really quiet and her resume is all rumpled and she didn't go to a top school, I'm going to say, I'm going to give her 59 minutes to prove to me that I'm wrong. Half the time I find that my original hypothesis is wrong. Half the time. And I don't think that's a coincidence that half the time our batting average is off.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you still want to do that if your first impression is that they're wrong?
Yeah. I'm already in the interview room. Now, look, I will stop an interview if it's going so badly, but I've already carved out the time. I'm already in front of the person. Something on paper tells me that there was a reason to meet this person, hopefully an employee referral. I'm going to give them every opportunity. Now, if by the end of the interview, I'm like, nope, my hypothesis was wrong, this is the wrong person, then, right, different outcome. Okay, 3 different types of interviews. The book goes through all this. I'm not going to bore you with it right now, but there's a phone screen that I use 20 minutes just to decide if I want to invest 5 or 6 hours of time with this person. My time, the 3 other interviewers' time. When you add up that money, it's a shitload of money. And I'm not spending that time unless the phone screen gives me some reason to believe it's going to be a good use of time. So I master that. On the phone screen, you got to find out, can I afford the person? I ask money on the very first phone screen. The book talks about how to do that. Make sure they don't have a non-compete. Then there's the career deep dive. I recommend the hiring manager do that. That person knows the job better than anybody else. And then the other 3 interviewers are focused on DNA. By the end of that, we have a really good sense of how the person does against the scorecard. We score them, we interview the candidates, we hopefully find our first and second choice. Why am I looking for our first and second choice? Because we don't always get our first choice. 30% of the time, they say no. So I got to be ready to go to my second choice. So I'm looking for an heir and a spare. I look to, this is a funnel, right? I'm looking to get from 20 candidates down to 5 that I bring in. But when in doubt, leave it out. If I only find 4, I only bring in 4. I don't delegate it to someone and say, hey, give me the top 5. I'm only looking for the ones that are worth my time. Then I'm looking to get down to the 2, the heir and the spare. What am I doing in the interview? You already know what they did. That's on the resume or LinkedIn. I want to know how they did it and why they did it. These 2 things tell you everything. But it requires mastering the follow-up question. You need to be genuinely inquisitive. If you're not, you should find someone who is. And ask, Adrian, how did you do that? And Adrian tells me, well, how did you do that? Well, I don't get it. How did you know to do that? It's like you're playing Columbo, the detective on TV. And what you find is with A players, the story holds together. With B and C players, it completely falls apart. They don't know why they did it. It was completely random. Their boss just told them to do it that way. Or worse, they're just making it up as they go. Okay, and I want to know why. In a startup, you're going to have a million problems every day. You need to hire people who are good at figuring out problems. That involves what I call cognitive ability. That is not IQ. I know plenty of people with great IQs I wouldn't hire for a startup. I know plenty of valedictorians I wouldn't hire for a startup. And I know plenty of people that ace their SAT and I wouldn't hire them for a startup. Cognitive ability is the ability to think through a problem, form a hypothesis, ask for the right data, evaluate the options, figure out, and run like hell. That is cognitive ability. And then close the feedback loop and change as situation warrants. So by asking why, if I'm interviewing a head of branding or my first head of marketing, I'm going to ask her, why did you develop that brand positioning for that company? And she may say, well, I had 7 options and we did a bunch of customer research and we looked at the data and here's what I found and blah, blah, blah. Or she may say, well, it just sounded good, or my boss told me that was the brand message. Like, you got to ask the follow-up question. Not to mention, everyone is lying to your face. Okay, so 81% of people aren't telling you the truth anyway. So of course you're going to trust but verify. Now the book talks about reference checks. We're not going to do that on today's call, but reference checks are hugely important to make sure you're actually getting the straight scoop. And even though you think you are, I can tell you they are lying to your face. I've been lied to many, many times. The summary of all this is to say that the best candidate is not the best interviewer. In fact, some of the best interviewers are salespeople. They've churn them and burn them. They last a year at every company. They are really good interviewers. That guy out of Central Casting. But that does not make them the best candidate. And vice versa. There are people who are not great interviewers. Maybe someone who hasn't really interviewed in 5 years. Maybe she's introverted. Maybe she's got a sick kid and her head is elsewhere. So she may not give a great interview, but that doesn't mean she's not a great candidate. You're looking for the scorecard. Bring it back to the scorecard. Does she have the competencies? Does she have the DNA? If she does, I don't really care how she interviews. I'm not hiring someone to be a professional interviewer unless I'm a TV news station. I'm hiring someone to do a job. So we covered 5. I'm going to leave you with the 6th and biggest one. This is the money. This is what you paid for the price of admission. You can thank me later and applaud later. And that is the test drive. This has changed my life. If interviews are notoriously bad predictors, if everyone's lying to me, if I have cognitive bias, if I can't focus on what schools they went to or what companies they worked at, what the heck do I look at the end of the day to figure out if they can do the job? And the answer is, don't guess, have them do the job. What most people do is they have the interviews, they stop the interview process and they're like, she's the one, oh my God, great interview. How fast can we get her an offer letter? She may just be a good interviewer. She may be a horrible match for the job. What you're gonna do instead is take them on a test drive. Sharon asked this question earlier. I think someone in the audience asked, what do I think about this? And what I think about this is if you don't do this, you should not be hiring. You can forget everything I've talked about. It all comes down to this. Now, unfortunately, it takes some time. So you can't put every candidate through a test drive. And by the way, they have to be on the hook. They have to be engaged enough to invest the time. So you're selling throughout the process. You can't, assess, and then sell. You got to assess and sell all the way through the process. But now they've interviewed and they crushed the interview. You don't just hire them. You take them on a test drive. This is the #1 best predictor, according to research, of how the person is going to do on the job, because you're seeing the person do the job. So I can fake an interview. I can't fake doing the job, but most entrepreneurs don't do this.
Jeff, real quick before we move on, I know back in the day, it used to be okay to do the 90-day probation period. Now that's not okay. So how can you really do the test drive? And I know that Arabi, who had asked the original question, kind of came up with some options, but how can you do the test drive in today's environment?
So I'll differ a little bit with what you said because it varies by city, by state, and by country. So always consult with your HR person, always consult with your employment attorney to understand what you can and can't do. However, in virtually every market I have looked at, you absolutely can do a test drive, even if you have to pay the person, pay them. It is the best money you ever spent. I'd pay Adrian for a week of his time. And by the way, he probably won't even take the money. But if I gave him the money and he shows that he's a horrible person at this task, I have saved myself best ROI you'll ever spend. So spend the money. But to your point, consult with HR, consult with your employment attorney, but don't let them tell you how to run your business. You are trying to avoid bad hires. So a test drive is having the person solve a problem or complete a project or have a working session that closely approximates the job. You can completely screw this up by designing a test drive that doesn't represent the job. Good example would be, well, McKinsey, Booz Allen, BCG, they do case interviews. That's great if you're hiring someone to do cases all the time. But if you're hiring someone to write code or develop marketing campaigns or make 100 outbound sales calls a day, then a case is not what you're looking for. You need to design an appropriate exercise to see them in action. How long should it be? The answer is as long as possible. Theoretically, the best test drive I've ever seen at Kellogg Business School is the summer internship, right? I get 10 weeks to see someone in action. Now, the reality is you're probably not gonna be able to do that because this person is probably working and they're not gonna quit their job, work for you for 10 weeks, to Sharon's point, on the hope that they get to keep the job. And I say we're always on probation. So to me, there's no probationary, but we all live on probation. Once you take money from VCs, believe me, you are on probation, even as a CEO, okay? But if I can't get 10 weeks, can I get 10 days? Can I get 10 hours? Can I get 3 hours? Can I get a take-home assignment? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Get as much as you can to make a well-informed decision. I generally find that if I can structure a 4-hour half-day test drive with someone, which by the way, maybe at night or weekends, you may have to work around the candidate's schedule because they're calling the shots, not you, because they got a job. In 4 hours working with them through a project, I can generally assess their cognitive ability, their ability to handle what I throw at them, how annoying they are to work with just because of their interpersonal style, how much of what they talked about in the interview was theory or what their boss did versus what they did. 4 hours is pretty hard to fake it, generally. Now, if I'm asking them to write code, it may be a take-home assignment. If it's a working session, it may be come into the office, work with us. It may be on Zoom, right? Design a test drive that most closely resembles the the position. You're not looking for a specific answer. You're looking to see how they handle the process. Do they have attention to detail, their cognitive ability, their ability to follow instructions? Can they even submit the assignment on time? I mean, you'd be shocked at what's out there, even from people that worked at great companies and great schools. So here's an example. Looking to hire an executive assistant. A big part of executive assistant competencies is writing and crafting emails and letters and attention to detail. So I write a letter and I embed 10 mistakes in it. And I say, you have a day to find as many of the mistakes as you can. I don't say 10, I just say as many as you can find. And please email it to me at this address at this specific time, in this format, as a PDF, right? Blah, 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 blah. Half of them completely bomb the instructions. Like, can't even follow basic instructions, which I'm not saying I'm a stickler for instructions, but it is indicative because I kind of assume this is the best work I'm ever going to see from you. It's only going to get worse from here. The other half, I'm looking at how many mistakes they found. And you know what I find? Some found 5 mistakes out of 10. Some found 7. A bunch find 10. But guess what? My Rockstar found 12. How did she find 12 mistakes? She found mistakes that I didn't even know I made. That's my winner, assuming she followed the instructions. You get my point. But I could not take that test drive and apply that to a CFO, right? CFO test drive, and the book outlines a whole bunch of examples. You know, I give them last quarter's numbers. I'm asking them to analyze the numbers, come present them to me and a potential board member, right? And pay them if you have to. It is not a big investment. I would say I had to pay maybe 3% of the time. You're thinking, how could I possibly ask candidates to go through this time and test drive? And I will tell you, candidates love doing this. The right candidate loves doing this. Rockstar candidates love doing this because they love showing their stuff. They love for you to see them in action. But you have to sell the test drive to them. And by the way, I don't call it a test drive. I call it kind of a working session or kind of a project, right? Test drive sounds arrogant. And the way I sell it is to say, look, Sharon, we're really close to a decision point here. You've invested a lot of time. You crushed the interviews. Nice job. I want to give you an inside view on what it's going to be like to work here. And I was thinking, you know, maybe we spend half day together and kind of work through a real life project, a real challenge we're facing with our website. And it'll give you an inside view of what it's like to work with us and to work with me, your manager, because I know you said you hate your manager. I want you to get to know me and make sure our style is compatible. What do you think of that? Oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I've already sold her on it. Now, it genuinely is giving her a chance. I've had candidates back out after test drives. They're like, this work is boring, or I don't want to do this, or I hate you guys, whatever. You'd far rather have that, have them opt out. While it's painful, it's way better than them taking the job and quitting after a month. But the secret is that it actually increases your acceptance rate. Remember I told you the average acceptance rate is 70%, 30% say no. When you do a test drive, their average acceptance rate goes up to 95%. They're kind of half pregnant, pardon the crudity of the expression, but they're already on the hook. They're engaged, right? They've seen the job. You've taken the risk out of it for them, and they're way more likely to accept the job. Okay? So candidates love test drives. So I'm happy to open up for questions. We've covered the first 6. If you're interested in the book, it's totally free. It's free. There's no catch. It's free. Just go to recruitrockstarsbook.com, recruitrockstarsbook.com. You can read through all that stuff, plus the other 4 sections, which talk about how to check references, how to make the offer, how to onboard, how to fire people, and then how to differentiate your top performers once you have them. It's the same course I teach at Kellogg. It also includes a link for the top secret templates you can download with all the PDFs and all the templates. So with all that, Sharon, I'm happy to take questions if there are any for a few minutes. I can't hear you for some reason.
Thank you. Before we jump into kind of audience questions, and I do want to remind everyone, just use the raise hand function so I can, and we'll try to call on people in the order that we see those hands. I think 4 questions that came up in the chat that I just decided to push to the end is 1, how can you define DNA more concretely? And I think you gave a couple of examples, but there's still a little bit of confusion. Toby, I know this was your question, and I also see your hand raised. So if you want to clarify on that question, you can at this point before we get to the next 3.
Yeah, why don't you clarify?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think I just wanted a way to quantify DNA just because you described breaking it up 50-50 between job skills and like I think you said you used to do like 80-20, but
Sure.
now it's 50-50. So I know that, yeah, you gave a lot of examples like quirky, for example, like it's the DNA is your DNA as the founder. But I think that it could just be a little bit more concretely defined such that we can actually quantify it. Thanks.
Sure. Sure. So let's say I've gone through the DNA, discovery exercise, and I've landed at three things. And I'll give you a real life example. My first company I started in Silicon Valley. For reasons I won't bore you with, we identified fearless, tireless, and selfless. Those were the DNA characteristics that we believed it would take for us to be successful in that particular venture. And we were. We scaled it, raised a lot of money, sold it, etc. Fearless, tireless, and selfless. We have the hiring manager doing the deep dive on competencies, and then we have the other three interviewers focused on DNA. There's two ways to do it. I've seen both work. I have a preference. Method one, each of the three interviewers focuses on just one DNA characteristic. The option two is all three focus on all three. I like the first one, and here's why. If I'm looking for selflessness, right? We've agreed we are never again going to hire someone who is not selfless, period. You either are or you're not. And I spend an hour interviewing Adrian on just selflessness. And I ask him to give me example after example after example. And I don't mean the first bullshit example that he knows from the website, selfless, and he's memorized this, right? He gives me that example. Great, thanks. Now I know you know how to read a website. Tell me another example of where you had to be selfless. Tell me another example. By the end of that hour, I can tell you that I will be able to assess whether he is selfless or whether he says he is selfless. There's just no two ways about it. You either are or you're not, because these things are hardwired. I'll use another example. If it's attention to detail. So Adrian, tell me about an example of where you had to be so detail-oriented you couldn't even believe it, or where being detail-oriented made the difference between success or failure. And his face lights up and he's like, oh yeah, I worked on this one project and I had to do this. And so I spent the weekend researching to figure out this and that, and I connected the dots. And then I called these four experts and I didn't want to forget that. So I did it right. And he just opens up. It floods out of him, detail orientation. He's like crying from excitement. And then I say, okay, give me another example. And he gives me another example for an hour. I know that sounds obvious, but there are plenty of people that would sit in that chair and I would say, tell me about your level of detail orientation. Give me an example. And they give me an example. And I'm like, really? Like, that's you being detail oriented? Like, that's not very detail oriented. Tell me another example. And they're like, well, in high school, I got second place for being most likely to be detail oriented. Like, it just falls apart. Now, they may be detail oriented, but they haven't convinced me, which means it's non-negotiable, which means I don't care how good their competencies are. We're done. That's how I do it. So it's a little bit bimodal. They either are or they're not. There's kind of no way to fake that. And the reason it's so important is I can't teach them. I can't teach you to be detail oriented or quirky or passionate about customers or whatever our DNA is, or selfless. That's my best answer. The problem is most people don't assess this at all. And by the way, in reference checking, which we're not going to focus on right now, chapter 7, I'm also going to confirm with someone that has worked with Adrian for 3 years that he is so selfless. And if they're like, yeah, he's kind of selfless, I guess, maybe. Well, that's kind of important to know because that person has worked with him for 3 years. I've known Adrian for 3 weeks. I'm going to really value that assessment. So that's how I look for DNA.
Thank you.
Yep.
So another question that we had was, at what stage of the company do you implement a formal recruiting strategy? Are there any milestones by which it should happen?
Day one.
Day one.
If you don't believe that this is the most important thing in building your business, you probably shouldn't be starting a company. Your company is made up of nothing but a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not code. It's not a building. It's not your logo. It's not the 5 million you raised. It's the 3 of you or the 30 of you or the 300 of you. So the first 50 are going to hire the next 500. Why would you not put in place? And by the way, I don't care if you use my process. I don't care. The book is free. I'm not going to make any money on it. But have a process, because we've already agreed, I think, that not having a process means you're basically going to have the same 50-50 hiring average as everyone else. And that's the beginning of the end. If you can get to a 90% average, you at least have a fighting chance as a startup. So I'd say from day one. And if that means recruiting your co-founder, I would start there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Sharon, I raised that question. I wanted to clarify that a little bit. So Jeff, the reason I raised that question was clearly as a founder, you're selling all the time, and whether it be selling for recruiting or selling to a customer or selling for fundraising. But the question was really to understand when a more formal process needs to be put in place from a recruiting standpoint, because in the early stages, it's just you recruiting as a founder, and oftentimes it's word of mouth, it's referrals, it's tapping into interns, tapping into whatever resources you have available out there, because it's a bit of a balancing act.
So what do you mean? What do you mean by formal?
Having the idea of the DNA and a scorecard and all of that, it's very relevant. The formal process is when you talk about having 4, for example, going back to what you had laid out, having 4 interviewers identified who will then have that sort of specific viewpoints on who we should hire as a company. That to me is a little bit more of a structured process, which I agree with. I just was curious at what stage and when do you actually have the flexibility to be able to do that, especially in the early stages, if it's just you as a founder or maybe 1 or 2 people in the team.
My answer doesn't change. It's from day one. It's first of all, even if you don't believe me, the data shows that 2/3 of startups fail because of people problems, which often include issues between the co-founders, by the way. If you get this wrong, it's almost unrecoverable, especially if you get it wrong in the early days. Look, when you're 1,000 people and you make a bad hire or a mishire, it's not going to kill the company. But if you're 3 people and you make a mishire, it could kill the company. It's that critical. And it doesn't just have to be an executive or a top level person. It's that important. If for no other reason, then pretty soon that person is going to be hiring other people or involved in interviewing other people. You have to get this right from the beginning. By the way, it is so much easier to put this in place at the beginning than to try to retrofit it on later. Teach your team good habits on interviewing, on assessing, on test drives, on reference checks. Even if you know all the stuff, even if you know all the stuff I just took you through, I can guarantee your team doesn't. They're never going to be as committed to you or have as high a level of standard. They're going to be willing to settle for a 6 or put a butt in a seat because you're putting pressure on them to ship the code or whatever it is. Put this in place early and you'll never have to retrofit it in later.
Got it. And would you also use a similar approach when it comes to hiring consultants?
Yes. Anyone you're paying to, any human you're paying to do work. It could be a gig worker, it could be a consultant, it could be a full-time employee, it could be a co-founder. Obviously, the time you invest depends upon how permanent it is and the risk level, right? You're not going to put as much time into hiring a 1-week contractor as a co-founder. But yeah, should be a scorecard. I know what I'm looking for. We have a number of interviewers. We do a test drive, same basic principles.
Thank you.
Adrian.
Yeah. So, well, the first question was the details on the scorecard and how to come up with those with the 4 interviewers. And then maybe just start with the second question, because it's actually relevant to what Arabi is talking about, is, we're super early stage. We have a team of volunteer interns. So they're not paid a salary, and as we've definitely had a lot of people problems coming up, I think one of the biggest issues, like I follow almost everything that you've talked about, except that when there is a bad fit, removing them from the organization lowers morale for everyone. And because everyone is not, dependent on this job, it has caused in the past a cascade effect for some people. I mean, the people who ended up leaving weren't good fits anyway, but it's still an issue that, there are some people who are a great fit and others who are not a great fit, but if I remove them, I risk losing the great people as well.
In my experience, having led 4 companies, getting a lot of gray hair, raising a lot of money, hiring 3,000 people, firing a shitload of people too, the negative impact on the rest of the organization by not removing the person is far higher than the negative impact on the organization of keeping them in place. Because you're asking everyone else to cover for this person. You're asking everyone else to pinch hit and do their work. You're asking everyone to work with someone who doesn't share their DNA and their passion. And worst, you're telling your organization, I'm full of it when it comes to talent.
So I actually believe that so I see that, right? A lot of the times though, the rest of the team, because they're also inexperienced, don't see that. And so it's difficult.
Your job is to educate them and enlighten them and make sure they see that. Your job is to explain, guys, I know that if I remove this person who's clearly underperforming because you're complaining to me every day about him, that you guys are gonna have to cover and pinch hit his work until I find the right person. Many of them, most of them in my experience will say, let's do it. I'd far rather that than me dealing with this clown every day who's slowing us down and holding us back and making mistakes. My goal as your leader is to bring the bar up, is to raise the bar up. I want you to work with people that are amazing. And in this case, I made a mishire. I apologize for that. I'm not perfect on hiring, but I'm going to clean up the mess. And if you don't clean up the mess, they're going to begin to wonder about your competencies and your capabilities. And if in a startup, as a founder or co-founder, your team's confidence in you is vitally important.
Sorry, can I just come in for a quick follow-up to what Adrian was talking and what Jeff you're saying? I think, and that's something a lot of very early stage founders like me wouldn't probably do, but, having OKRs, key objective response, objective key response, documents are very, very important because, if you can really follow up, very systematically why that guy needs to be let go if they are, if you're asking them for that, there's so much validation and proof, which also confirms to you why you are letting them go.
Oh, let's be very clear. I didn't mean to imply that willy-nilly, I'm just letting people go because I...
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just saying that
if that person is surprised in any way that you're letting them go, you failed as leader.
Yes. Yeah. So just having these, very systematic, processes in place from early on. And, like you said, having a talent acquisition strategy, all of these strategies early on, which maybe we don't think too much about in the beginning, are key. And, I think it sets your mind at kind of rest and, puts everything into order right from the very beginning because you have it all documented.
And that includes review, a review process and feedback. And unlike many people, I'm not a fan of an annual review. I think it's a waste of time. The book, Chapter 10, talks about this, a short monthly conversation where I'm giving feedback and I'm sending an email after documenting that. There's a paper trail if I ever need it. And so that the person is incredibly clear on the feedback. Hopefully it's positive, as well as the few things they need to continue to work on. Mm-hmm. There should never be a surprise. The problem comes in when I make a mishire, not on competencies, but on DNA. I'm going to know it after 2, 3, 4 weeks. And by the way, your team's going to know it even before you do. You're the last to hear anything. And then the question is, what are we going to do about it? And you need to have a heart-to-heart with them and say, you know what, I've made a mistake. This is not a match. This is not a place where you're going to thrive. And here's why. Our characteristics are these, and you've demonstrated that yours are not. That doesn't make you a bad person. I'm not firing you today, but it's time to begin looking for your next opportunity. I'll help you any way I can with introductions because this is not a match.
Yep.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you. Another question, Jasmine, I'll ask you to open up your mic just so you can ask the question that you dropped
The other
in.
one was the scorecard one. Like
Oh,
like how do
Adrian.
you set the scorecard with those 4 interviewers?
Are you asking me or Sharon?
Yeah. Yeah. Like what are we putting on that scorecard?
Oh, okay. So literally, what is the scorecard?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the book, there's a link and you can download a bunch of sample scorecards, but I'll give you the summary. So the scorecard that I use is half competencies, half DNA. DNA we've kind of talked about, right? It's 3 to 5 non-negotiable characteristics that every single person in the company has. The competencies are the 5, 10, 15 competencies that the person must have in order to be successful in the role. So if I'm hiring my first outbound salesperson, right? And I define success in the role as, builds $1 million pipeline within 6 months. Okay, what are the accountabilities on a day-to-day basis that person must have in order to do that? Just list them out, right? They got to be able to do research to find prospects. They got to log them in Salesforce.com. They got to smile and dial 100 calls a day. They got to keep smiling when the person hangs up on them. They need to make the pitch. They need to schedule appointments for a webinar, whatever it is. Like, it's not rocket science. You list out all those accountabilities. Now I need to go to what competencies would someone need to have in order to do those things successfully? Well, if they need to do that, they need to have pretty good attention to detail and log it all on Salesforce.com. They need to have the ability to learn our story. They need to learn how to overcome or be able to overcome basic objections. They need to have the resilience to keep smiling when someone says fuck you and hangs up on them. You develop that list of competencies. That's what goes in the scorecard. What doesn't go on the scorecard are things that are not predictive. Worked at Google, 5 to 10 years of industry experience, went to Stanford. These things are not predictive of anything. They're nice to have. They're great on the margin, but that's not what's on the scorecard. So you have those competencies, you have the DNA, you interview, you assess, you do the test drive, you score the person 1 to 10, and that's it. And then, of course, the team debriefs to compare notes. And if there are differences of opinion, which there may be, you actually engage in a discussion, not a bullshit email, what'd you think? I liked them, I didn't like them. That's not what I'm talking about. You actually have a discussion to reconcile any differences. And that may mean we need to get more information, right? We really didn't crack whether she has the attention to detail that we need. You set up a follow-up interview and you get to the bottom of it, or you focus on reference checks. So that's what a scorecard looks like. But again, the book has a bunch of samples for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jasmine, go ahead.
So this goes a little more to kind of post-hiring, but still talent related. So I'm much like Suhila. I think I'm very documentation oriented, but I also do hire kind of with, training in mind. So kind of the use of a PIP, and I'm not looking at sales. I would exclude like all sales hires from this conversation. But the use of a PIP kind of within like, let's say the first 12 months, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like PIP formal scary, but as far as like how to improve performance, what is kind of your advice? Let's say you're 2 months in, but not past that.
So is the question the best practice for improving performance?
It's not necessarily the best practice for improving, but yeah, I guess that's it. It's more along the lines, if you have someone and they could be a great fit, like the DNA still fits, all of that's still there.
Yeah.
Kind of using that PIP as a tool as opposed to like a scare factor, which I think,
right,
because they're corporately used, it gets a bad name.
Sure. So a PIP, for those of you that don't know, is a performance improvement plan. And it's often what a manager puts, I'm putting you on a PIP, is the full phrase. I can count on one hand the number of times that a PIP worked and the person magically changed and came off PIP. It's usually used as a way to exit the person from the organization. I don't use PIPs. I think we all live on a PIP, myself included, yourself included, every day. But I do believe in frequent feedback on a monthly basis, a dedicated feedback conversation. And in that conversation, we're talking specifically about the delta or the disconnect between the competencies that are needed for success in the role and the competencies that the person is demonstrating, and then working together. And by the way, it's not just your job, it's the person's job too. I mean, it's your staff member's job too, to figure out how do we close that gap. Is it an online training program? Is it getting them a mentor? Is it sending them back to school? Is it read this book? Is it, I'm going to sit down for 6 hours and show you again for the 3rd time how to do this? Whatever it is, developing an action plan. So you do that, and then you observe, you give positive feedback, which works way better than negative feedback. I've seen huge improvements in what you're doing. Congratulations, that 6 hours we spent together really seems to work. Now I want you to focus on this, that, and the other thing. But you know what, guys, in a startup, you don't have a lot of time. Especially you don't have a lot of time to micromanage your B and C players, which you shouldn't have anyway, because you're taking it away from your A players and you're taking it away from your customers and everything else. So you need to decide in your mind, how much time can I afford to give this? And the answer is usually less than you think. I'm not saying you fire someone after the first mistake, but I can't spend 12 months on improving someone's competencies if it's going to take me that much time. I probably made a mishire, or I probably hired a great person, but they will be great here 2 years from now. Once I have an infrastructure, once I've got a support system, once I've got a QA person. But if I need the developer to do their own QA and she just doesn't know how to do QA, and I forgot to assess that in the interview process, then I messed up. Now, I have a choice. Spend the money and get a QA person so she can excel, teach her how to do her own QA, or say, you know what, I fucked up and this is not a match. We'd love to have you back in 2 years when we have QA, but we don't right now. But you need to be very cognizant about how much time you invest on that feedback cycle.
Okay, and then kind of tangential to that, sorry to pile on. I know you said you're not a big fan of the annual reviews. I'm not necessarily either. Shy of a 360 review, because I'm also not fond of that. Just for productivity, I love feedback, but just 360s I haven't had good luck with. Do you have a structure that you advise?
Yes, and the book goes through it, and it is super simple. It is super simple, because what most people do is, let's say Sharon reports to you. Every time Sharon pisses you off or does something crappy, you write it in your phone and you have a whole little list, and you have 18 things, and then you're going to sit down and give Sharon a performance review with these 18 things. Guess what? She's not going to hear any of that. What are the 2 or 3 game-changing things that are going to make the difference? 80-20. And talk about specific examples, which again, if we're doing this once a month, those examples should be pretty recent. The reason annual performance reviews don't work is this stuff ancient history. It's 6 months ago, 9 months ago. Many big companies are getting rid of their annual performance review. They spend all this time. It's a waste of time and money. I summarize that in my mind before I sit in the meeting with Sharon. And I say, okay, I'm obviously going to, give her the same shit sandwich we always do. Here's all the stuff you do great. Here's the negative feedback, but you're really great. You know that thing, right? But I'm focused on what are the 2 or 3 things I need Sharon to master, to really excel in this role. 2 or 3, not 18. But I get in the meeting with Sharon and I say, Sharon, let's, and we've scheduled this in advance. It's not a 5-minute add-on to our staff.
Jeff, is it just me? We can't hear you.
Yeah, he's muted for me too.
Nope, still nothing. Okay.
Anything?
Yes, there we go.
Great. I fixed it.
Okay. You dropped off where you said you scheduled this in advance. It's not 5 minutes.
Schedule in advance. It's not a 5-minute add-on. Here's what I do. I say, so Sharon, how do you think this month went? I ask her first. Because until I do that, I have no idea if she thinks she blew it away and she's kicking butt, or maybe she's down in the dumps and she thinks I'm about to fire her when I'm actually thrilled. I want to know where her head is at. What most managers do is they come in and, well, let's go through your feedback. I have 17 things I'd like to take you through that I think you could be doing better. right? Which is an immediate turnoff. And I have no idea if she thinks she's doing great, if she thinks she's doing poorly. So I start with that. What I find is top performers are harder on themselves than I will ever be on them. She's like, yeah, I really screwed that project up. I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I felt terrible about it. I messed up that investor pitch, or right? I'm spending the rest of the meeting bringing her up, not giving her negative feedback, because she's already knows she messed up. Why pile on? Does that make sense? So, oh wait, now I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I muted
Oh,
myself.
okay. And then one last thing. Follow up the session in writing, in a short email, doesn't have to be long, just enough to cover yourself with the feedback. Sharon, I really enjoyed the chance to talk to you. I just wanted to summarize these 2 things that we talked about. Now you have your paper trail. So when the day comes in 6 months, if God forbid we ever need to part ways, you're not then starting the clock. You've already got your paper trail. And any HR person, and I'm friends with a gazillion of them, will say that's all you need. You don't need more. You just need proof that you've talked to this person enough times that they still don't get it. That's it. Go ahead.
And sorry, can I ask one more?
You can ask as many as you want.
Okay.
Sharon's the master of ceremonies. I'm not.
Sorry.
Yeah, we got 25 minutes, but yeah, so go ahead, Jasmine, if there are no questions.
So it was, it's kind of around tools. So at a previous company that was a little bit bigger, I used a tool called Lattice. I didn't know, and that kind of keeps you goal oriented and opens those communication lines. Is there anything that you advise for like a smaller scale company?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Sound happened again, Jeff.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? You can't hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Yeah.
now.
Okay. You know what this is?
No.
Can you see me?
Oh, your camera's off. I thought you
My
turned
camera's
your
off?
Yeah.
Oh my God. My camera's off? How'd my camera go off? Okay, can you see me now?
Nope.
No.
Let me,
Hang on.
there should be something
Hang on.
that pops up on your screen. There we go. Yes, we can see you.
I don't know what's going on. So the question was, what do I use? It's called this. I don't use a fancy, as a startup, you should not be putting your money into some fancy SaaS package for goal tracking. First of all, you shouldn't have very many goals, right? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Sorry.
Like if you have that many goals as a startup, if you have that many goals that you can't, they're not memorized and fitting onto an index card, then there's a problem. So I'm not a big fan of any of those tools. I'm not a fan of any of those tools for big companies either, but especially not for an early stage company.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is RB. I have another question. And Jeff, this pertains to recruiting for the board and any advisory members as well. I would assume a lot of what you shared definitely applies in that case as well. But are there any other specific nuances that we should keep in mind when thinking about board level members and advisory members as well? And in particular, I'm very curious, when going back to the DNA conversation, I just want to make sure if there's a way to avoid any type of an echo chamber type of situation where everyone on the team essentially is along a certain DNA, but then you always need that one or two viewpoint that is diverse enough to keep you on your toes, so to speak.
Yeah, good questions. So on the second one, I haven't found that they're mutually exclusive. I haven't found that if a team of people share the same DNA, that immediately means you get into groupthink. It doesn't, in real life, I just haven't seen that be a problem. What you can get, if you're not careful, is lack of diversity. And so you need to make sure your pipeline of how you're hiring and where you're looking for candidates is diverse. That's a different issue. And the book has some specific recommendations on that. On the first one, yes. With board members, let's say an independent board member, which is a crucial hire, I go through the same process, but there is one big difference. I don't emphasize DNA as much because they're not living in the business. They're not working directly with the rest of the team. That's just